Blake. I'm the CEO of the Perth US Asia Center, and we're a presenting partner for this panel today at the Conference on Indonesian Foreign Policy 2019. I have had the great honor of attending this conference every year for the last 5 years, and I'm deeply impressed with the attendance, with the energy in the youthful community, and the focus on serious issues, not just for Indonesia, but for the entire region. So I thank you all for coming, and it is a great honor for our center based in Jakarta's southern suburb of Perth, Western Australia, just 4 hours south, to help convene an important discussion. We had a wonderful opening panel that focused very broadly on this theme of a hot peace versus the Cold War. But this panel is actually going to bring things down to what they say where the rubber meets the road. And so we're going to be talking about infrastructure and connectivity. Because in many respects, we can talk on a philosophical level about competition. But if you have read the media in the last 3 to 5 years, you will know that there has been an intense focus on a perceived competition when it comes to infrastructure. If I were to ask this audience, I'll do a Pactino type of exercise. Has anybody ever heard of the PQI? One person, right? The PQI is the Japanese Partnership for Quality Infrastructure. Has anybody heard of the Belt Road Initiative? Everybody, who's heard of the Belt Road Initiative? BRI. The Belt and Road Initiative. How do we say that in Indonesian? Is there a special Indonesian word for it? Yeah. So in the Belt Road Initiative, it tends to, in the media, be very, very popular. And so often, the media present this as a competition. China versus Japan. China versus the United States. And much of the discussion around infrastructure and connectivity tends to be negative in nature, like a new Cold War. We have convened today a remarkably diverse panel that is going to help us think through these issues in, I think, a much more positive and forward-looking way, recognizing that infrastructure and connectivity are the ties that bind this region together. And in no country is that more important than it is in Indonesia. We did a report in January of this year looking at infrastructure and connectivity initiatives in the region. And one of the conclusions of that report was that there was an infrastructure gap of about $1.4 trillion, almost the entire economy of Indonesia every single year. In terms of bridges, rails, highways, information technology, internet speeds, everything that are needed to continue to fuel the economic growth of this region. And so one of the conclusions from that report is it's not Belt and Road Initiative or US investment or Japanese investment or Asian Development Bank or Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It's really and. Because even if we took every penny of grants made by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and every penny of funds from the Belt Road Initiative and every penny of the new US-Japan Blue Dot Initiative and every penny of the Partnership for Quality Initiative, it still would not be enough. So that hopefully sets the context for what we're doing. Our panelists have kindly arrayed themselves in order with which they're going to speak. And I will introduce them all in turn and then give them kind of a very specific question. And today, we're very honored to have lead out our discussion the coordinating minister for maritime affairs, Pak Ridwan Jamaluddin. Sorry, but I knew I got it wrong even though I practiced it 3 times.
You practiced it.
I practiced it and I still got it wrong. So we obviously have some language infrastructure problems already, right? But Pak Ridwan has one of the broadest portfolios in the Indonesian government. When you're dealing with a country with 17,000 islands, and you're dealing not just with infrastructure, but you're dealing with the investment side of infrastructure, I think we could not ask for a better opening speaker to help kick it off. So let me first turn to Pak Ridwan and ask him to look at this from an Indonesian government perspective, particularly in terms of what you hope to achieve during the course of this new government. So, Pak Ridwan.
Thank you, Gordon. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I think I would start with listening to the opening ceremony. I like the statement that Superman is dead, actually. So there is no Superman on earth these days. So that's more or less how Indonesia sees external partners these days. We have a close cooperation with China, but we talk to the Japanese, we talk to the Korean, we talk to the United States, we talk to the Australian. So no Superman on earth. Second, briefly on the global maritime fulcrum concept of Indonesia. It's basically a paradigm to connect Indonesia internally and Indonesia with the external world throughout adequate infrastructures. So the keyword is connectivity, because being the largest archipelagic state like Indonesia, we cannot afford to avoid this. The connectivity must be a combined platform of sea transportation, land transportation, and air transportation. And again, the concept is to connect all, well, as much as possible, the islands in Indonesia and Indonesia in the rest of the world. With that, we cannot afford to do it all alone. Based on my understanding, Indonesian government could only provide 20-25% of the budget. So the rest we have to work with partners. So far, we have partnership with China. We always combine the global maritime fulcrum and Belt and Road Initiative. That's how we put those two concepts, those two programs as a win-win synergy approach between the two countries. We develop a proposal to develop at least 30 development programs in 4 economic corridors: North Kalimantan, North Sumatra, North Sulawesi, and Bali. But we also work with the Japanese on under discussion still on medium speed train, for example, Jakarta, Surabaya. We work with the Japanese on port development. We are working with the Koreans on industrial estate. We are talking about electric vehicles with many partners. So, and my boss, Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs and Fishery, and investment, has been very active in talking with major investors in the world, talking with SoftBank, talking with Ping An, and talking with sovereign wealth fund throughout the world. So that's how we do it. Also, it is also important to mention that the infrastructure we are building are not only those big ones, but we also work on smaller ones to connect the big cities, the urban with villages, because most of Indonesians are still living in villages. Now the trend is, after the first 5 years of President Joko Widodo's administration, which focused very much on infrastructure, now we are working on how to utilize the infrastructure as much as possible. The basic concept is to connect the infrastructure with economic centers, economic activity centers. So building more industries, industrial estates, building more factories, promoting more small and medium enterprises in the proximity of the built infrastructure. Other than that, we are also building infrastructures to support distance learning, for example, and distance health services with the program, the Palaparing program. It's part of that context. So now the infrastructures are not what we can see on the ground, on sea, but also includes the infrastructure that President Jokowi used the terminology of tol langit, for example. So those infrastructure are built not only for current utilization, but also for younger generation in Indonesia. I think that's my opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much. Please second for your remarks. Dr. Tang, if I can get you one of those things. Our next speaker is Dr. Tang Qifang, who's a research associate at the China Institute for International Studies, which is the foreign ministry's think tank in Beijing, has spent time studying in Japan. So you'll find out as I introduce the rest of our panelists, there's a remarkable degree of intra-regional knowledge, understanding, and experience here. But as indicated, probably the most well-known infrastructure project in the broader public has been the Belt Road Initiative. But given the fact that Dr. Tang has worked in Japan and has a regional perspective, we would welcome your perspectives on how China sees this question of regional infrastructure development. So, Dr. Tang.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Good morning, and yes, when we talk about the keywords like infrastructure, South Asian countries, China, Japan, and I think the first image we have is competition. As we read too many stories on the competition on this topic. But I think we should focus more on the other story is cooperation. And I think from a different perspective, we have more bright future for cooperation on this topic. First, that I think from the perspective of the need for infrastructure in South Asian countries, we can make more cooperation, not only between China and Japan, but between all of the partners. And according to ADB, that in the period since 2016 to 2030, in the 15 years, that in the whole area of ASEAN countries, that the need for infrastructure, the investment need is about 2.8 trillion US dollars, and only if Indonesia alone is 1.1 trillion dollars in this 15 years. And so it's a great gap that need the foreign investment. So no matter China or Japan, not only one country can cover this gap. So we need the cooperation. And when we come to Indonesia, and because President Joko make a great plan for the investment in the future infrastructure development, I think it's about there is a gap about 450 billion only for the investment gap for President Joko's plan. So I think how to cover this good gap? It's just a cooperation with all of the partners, including China and Japan. And this from the need perspective, and from the policy on the perspective, both from China and the Japan, because Japan make a very great plan of PQI, and China make a great plan of BRI. But we can see that to the infrastructure investment in South Asian countries, especially on the high-speed way. When we're talking about this, you can see that the Chinese plan is from the north to the south, right? It's from the south. Basically, Chinese plan is from north to the south, and the Japanese plan is from the west to the east. So if we can make a cooperation, this is just make a network. You can not only from one direction, but we have all directions. In the future, if we can make this great cooperation in the future, this just make a wonderful network of high-speed railways in the whole area. But of course, that we need it need our political will, and of course, and more is the investment, the business to cooperation in the future. Okay, and the other is that this, from another perspective is finally is that for the common goods perspective, because this kind of cooperation can make not only the goods for the investors, but also for the whole region, not only South Asia, but whole the East Asian regional cooperation. And I think now we already have some good examples of the cooperation between China and Japan, at least. Like in Thailand, we have the EEC, East Economic Corridor cooperation. And there are also some project cooperation between ADB and AIIB already. So it is not impossible for the two partners, China and Japan, to make cooperation on the infrastructure development in South Asian countries. It's possible, but the problem is that we need more optimistic encouragement for this trend, not just make the cold water on this fire. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. So very often when we speak of infrastructure, we actually think only of the physical infrastructure, the bridge, the road, the port, the airport, the high-speed internet cables. But almost every one of these projects actually has to have a business model behind it, a case where it can pay for itself. And we'd like to turn to our next speaker. We're fortunate to have on this panel two economists. The first is Dr. Sae Chi, is a professor of economics at the University of Western Australia, the same at the university where the Perth US Asia Center is based. And she's going to give us a little bit more of an economics perspective on the underlying economics behind many of these infrastructure projects in the region. So, Dr. Chi.
Thank you, Gordon. So I'm just gonna, this is what I felt when I got to Jakarta. There's so many people here, so many businesses, and there's definitely a potential for Indonesia to succeed in terms of the economic growth. And I think there's a lot of potential, so I'm speaking on the basis of that. So what you need to minimize the infrastructure gap, you need two things. One is the investments. Yes, you need money to build things. But another thing you need is the effective infrastructure planning. So what does that mean? What's needed is robust and systematic infrastructure investment assessment and decision making. Why? Because what's involved in this is two things. One is the risk management. So you know exactly what risk that's involved in each of the project, because who wants to invest in a risky business? No one. So if you want to attract investors, you need to do the risk management properly, and that's in the effective infrastructure planning. Now, another thing that comes along is the economic benefits. And that obviously goes back to the people and businesses. And when people and businesses have a lot of money, that goes back to the government as a revenue, as some form of tax, right? And that can then go back to the people again into the infrastructure development or some other form of public investment. Now, so what is a good project? It can be many forms, like many people mentioned already, but it is all about connectivity, like the other speakers talked about. So good project will link people to where they work, where their jobs are, from where they live. So it's that connection between the places. But also it's about linking the goods to the people and businesses. So that's where the economic benefits are coming from. And that's why I'm saying looking at Jakarta, at least, there's a lot of potential because I can see where businesses, many businesses are located in Jakarta, many people are living here. So in terms of distance, unlike Australia, in terms of distance, it's not a long distance you need to link the people to and from. Because Australia, obviously, we have a less population, it's a lot more spread out, people live in the regional area, it's such a long distance you have to connect. But you don't have that kind of problem here. So that's why I'm saying there's a lot of potentials here. I can talk more about technical information in terms of what's involved in the effective infrastructure planning, but I think I'll keep it to the question and answers for later. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is also an economist. It's Dr. Tomo Kikuchi. He's recently moved to be an associate professor at Koryo University in Korea after spending 12 years in Singapore at the RSIS, the Rajaratnam School for International Studies in Singapore. So native Japanese who's worked tremendously on these issues in the region. Just last month, our center put out the fourth in a series of edited volumes on the Indo-Pacific, including this most recent one focusing on Japan's role in building the infrastructure of the Indo-Pacific. And we were very fortunate to have Tomo do the Japanese chapter on that book, looking at the economic aspects of it. So Tomo, I mean, this panel was deliberately framed by the organizers as kind of is this an infrastructure Cold War? Since you've looked at it, you know, from kind of Singapore, but also from Northeast Asia as well, is that how you would characterize it? How would you characterize that fundamental contest that's taking place in the regions?
Okay. Good morning. Let me stand up.
Yeah, yes.
So I can see all of you. It's easier. So Gordon posed now the question: are we witnessing infrastructure Cold War? My answer is no, because we don't see any ideological conflicts. It's true that there is a continuous political spectrum, but it's more about the balance between government interventions and market forces. In my view, the differences that you see between Japan and China in how they approach infrastructure basically comes from the fact that these two countries are at different stages of development. So let me elaborate a little bit. So China, first of all, you know that China has been on a kind of steroids for many decades. China's model, growth model, is based on high saving, high investment, export-oriented strategy. Now, China faces diminishing returns to these investments domestically. Yet, the government has still a very strong control over the key industries. So China's approach is naturally a government-led one, with focus on engineering and technology, low cost, and so on. On the other hand, Japan has had its high growth period, but has now 2 lost decades behind. Japan's population is shrinking. It is aging. Domestic markets are shrinking. As you might not know, now for Japan, the biggest contributing factor for current account surplus is no longer exports, is returns on foreign investment. Okay? And especially related to infrastructure, all the sectors that you can think of, telecommunication, transportation, energy, all these sectors in Japan have been privatized since 1980s. Okay? So that means Japan's approach is naturally a more corporate approach, okay, with focus on transparency, governance, feasibility, environment, and so on. Now, we talked about BRI and PQI. Let me just tell you three things that I think are most important looking at Japan's and China's experience. First is that the so-called best practices from developed countries' perspective is not necessarily the optimal choice for a developing country, especially when it's growing fast. This is because the so-called best practices often underestimate the externalities that public infrastructure has in supporting economic growth. So that's my first point. My second point, having said this, what worries me most is a trade-off between short-term political economic gains and long-term liability. Okay. My third point related to this is that ultimately the stakeholders of public infrastructure are the people. Okay. You guys are going to benefit from externality that public infrastructure provides, but also have to bear the cost in terms of taxes, tolls, fees, as well as non-pecuniary costs, such as costs on the environment, and etc. Okay. So these are the three main points. Let me finish my remarks by talking a little bit about Indonesia. 3 points. First point, I think Indonesia does not need to subscribe to any model. Okay? I think Indonesia can combine the hard infrastructure approach by China and the soft infrastructure approach by Japan. But you need to control for the merits and demerits that these two approaches have, and then make it suit the Indonesian blueprint. Okay. My second point, or my third point, and this is, I think, my most important point. If you look at Indonesia, Indonesia is one of the least financially developed countries in ASEAN. Okay. And let me tell you this, that foreign capital can never substitute domestic capital. Japan, China, Singapore might invest in Indonesia, but ultimately, Indonesia needs institutions, public saving vehicles, investment vehicles. I'm here talking about things like long-term credit banks, export banks, and other saving vehicles that channels domestic savings into domestic investment. Okay, thank you. That's all for me.
Thank you. Our next speaker is one of Indonesia's greatest natural resources, which is the Indonesian diaspora. If anywhere you go around the room, there's a tremendous number of Indonesians who've gone and been very successful globally. For the last 18 years, Rainier Haryanto has worked in the private sector in Australia. He's now pursuing a PhD at University of New South Wales, but brings a private sector perspective to this question. So kind of how do we need to understand this from a private sector perspective?
Thanks, Gordon. So, if I may, I better stand up.
Yeah,
I just tell you.
Pressure now.
Selamat siang. So I think if we let's talk about infrastructure investment. I think all the speakers in here speak on different angle. But when you talk about infrastructure investment, people always forget there's always two sides of story, or two sides of investment. One on the public side, the other one is actually private side, where a lot of people are missing. If we talk about infrastructure gap, which keep growing, reality-wise, even you combine all the government together, multilateral development bank together, surprisingly, none of them combined can actually fund the whole infrastructure development. It's actually only able to fund less than 50%. What the remaining 50%? Private sector. And if people don't realize, at least I mean my observation over the past decade, where it used to be public and private works in two sort of parallel, sorry, just ignore that, in two parallel sort of paths, Nowadays, actually, it just like become two sides of coin. Why is that? Because government with their public intention, they need private sector. In the same way, private sector is so desperate because they have money floating, and for them, as a private sector, they're seeking for growth. And the best way is actually invest. But if they want to invest, coming back to the two speakers say that they always come down to look to the risk, to the liability. And let's bring down to the context of the region. Any country always highlight the point of important infrastructure. In fact, actually, Indonesia competes against Thailand, against Vietnam, against Malaysia. They keep saying like, look, private sector coming in and invest in our country, invest on our project. Let me sort of introduce from the private sector point of view, because when I was on the private sector side, what brings me to invest on the country is only a few things. One, it's all about sustainability of the pipeline, because investment is not only one-off, it's a series of investment that I need to focus on, and I think that's the typical thing that what the private sector like to see. Second part is actually governance, consistency, and this is where I'm going to sort of touch a bit on Indonesia on the later stage. Number 3 is about project preparation document. What it means with document, because it needs to list down all the liabilities, all the risks that the private sector needs to come in. And let me sort of bring down into the context of Indonesia why I think everyone attend the morning session in here. I think Pak Dino came out with a very good question, whether Indonesia can surpass Vietnam. I think this is quite a big topic actually in the investment world nowadays, because when I start to compare Indonesia and Vietnam, no doubt, we actually take an English phrase, Indonesia is actually one of the beautiful girls in the room. Because everyone wants to attract to the beautiful girl. But reality-wise, why is it so difficult? And why is it suddenly everyone now sort of sucked into the Vietnam? Because easy of doing business, good governance. It seems to be like in all the investors sees like Vietnam has a lower risk compared to Indonesia. And this is something that Indonesia needs to sort of push in order to actually attract all this private sector to help Indonesia to deliver the infrastructure. That's number 1. Number 2 is always come down to the political risk. Where interestingly I find that I actually attended, I spoke in a conference as well about last month. And someone from Indonesia, Australia actually sort of, if you can go to my last slide, actually point out how wonderful the Indonesia politics is nowadays. What it means with that, I think people don't realize with the coalition that the current government has, if you look to the bottom side, seems to be like now, it seems to be like 74% of the political party actually leaning towards the government, means that it has a majority of support. This is a study being done by Indonesia Australia Center by Kevin Duggan. And this is sort of showing that Indonesia has quite consistent politics. And this is one important thing, because any investment coming in, one of the biggest consideration is sort of the balance of the politics. But I think lastly, I mean, sort of closing my remark, if we talk about infrastructure investment, I think, I sort of agree with what you say, Tom San, where at the end of the day, there's no one formula for any investor coming in. They realize that whatever happened in developed country, it cannot be duplicated to other developed country. Even in the happening country cannot be duplicated. Indonesia as a country where, as I said, like it's one of the hottest girl in the room, they need to work on how to sort of maximize the benefit or take the advantage of successful story and put it together and bring this private sector in. And therefore, that's why I intentionally put the wording that it takes 2 to tango, because when you dance tango, it's not only one person, it will require 2. So I think in the commercial world, it's always buyer and seller. Buyer and seller needs to work together in finding a sort of like a one same ground to deliver the infrastructure. I think that takes my 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our final speaker is also a PhD candidate, but at Murdoch University in Western Australia. Trisha Wijaya also authored a chapter in our most recent report on Japan's infrastructure leading role in the region, but brings to us some perspective, obviously from an Indonesian, in fact, a Padang kind of perspective, looking at with experience in Japan and China, etc. So Trisha, will kind of the final word over to you.
I think I will just stand up because according to the research, people will just concentrate in the first 40 minutes, and it has been past 40 minutes, I think. So I will just stand up to warm up the room. And selamat siang semua. I'm so pleased to be here, and it's such a great honor for me to be surrounded by a very inspirational young people and also a wide expert with a wide range of experience and knowledge. And first of all, please allow me to deliver a couple of points in an academic point of view pertaining to the political economy and international relations. So actually, over the past few years, we have been witnessing the growing initiatives from this region, like South Korea even also have the Southbound Policy, Japan Partnership for Quality Infrastructure, China Belt and Road Initiative, and recently, there's also another rising star in the Pacific, Trump with his Blue Dot Network. Yeah, actually, although all these initiatives seemingly are so abstract, but they are so booming and become media darling. And what's the point here is I'm quite disappointed with what media portrayed with all these initiatives, seemingly portrayed it as the head-to-head competitions between states and how China want to counterbalance Japan, US want to counterbalance China, and so on. But the missing point here, there are two. So first, the historical content. Particularly after Japan lost to China in 2015 due to the Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway, this case became the media darling all over the region. Wherever I'm going to a particular conference and I meet someone there and someone asks, "Where are you from?" "I'm from Indonesia." "Wow, your country now coming to the competitions, right? We are under trap, like with China, Chinese debt trap, and how can Indonesia give the project to China and so forth?" So it's simply like even for some country like in Africa, there were not familiar with Indonesia before. Just because this Jakarta-Bandung high-speed railway, they try to understand Indonesia more and want to understand more about our infrastructure, why we are so getting close to China. So this is a very interesting fact, what's happening now. But when we look back to the history, actually the infrastructure is not a new thing. It has been there since the very beginning. It's just like a cosmetic product, like always promote for the whitening, wrinkle, anti-wrinkle, but you never get white and the wrinkle's still there. So, that's the infrastructure. So, and therefore we need to look back at the historical content, especially Japan. It has been here for 60 years. And I think no foreign country in Indonesia can understand Indonesia better than Japan. Has been through political turbulence in Indonesia, state transformation in Indonesia. And whereas China also has different historical context with Indonesia. Perhaps after the financial crisis, it's actually China who helped us to rebound the economy, and also there are a lot of postponed infrastructure projects in Indonesia like Suramadu Bridge and then Tayan Bridge in Kalimantan. It's China who did that, and actually it's the best project and it got a lot of awards in China. So actually our country is the best representative in the region who can choose selectively which project that are suit the best for this country, even though the infrastructure is still becoming the fact, like becoming things, just like the cosmetic product. So, and another missing point here, we are not in the infrastructure war per se, like media said, like China head to Japan, but more or less, we are in the war between ourselves, like in Indonesia itself. So wherever there is a deregulation in Indonesia, for example, like the removal, like the elimination of negative investment list where the foreign investor can try to invest in Indonesia in like highway project and so forth. But there's also another drawback in another level of government in Indonesia. So wherever there is a deregulation, there will also another re-regulation. So this is a little bit war between ourselves, and also war about perception. It's about the time. Wherever the election coming, then China become the villain, become the suddenly the Chinese investor was considered as the People Liberation Army in Indonesia. So yeah, it's about time. But right now, when we are becoming stable, like Chinese investor was welcome, Korean investor was welcome, highly welcome. So we are in the war with ourselves. So that's I will just conclude my remark until here. I'm looking forward to have an interactive section with you. Thank you.
So the hard question is this: is there really competition in the region in terms of infrastructure? And is that competition good or bad? That's the question. So to be clear, Dr. Wijaya just talked about, debt trap diplomacy. And if you look at the media, you'll see stories of Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, big giant thing built, unprofitable, not market-based. Just this week, there's reports out of PNG about debt, right? And so projects that are built based on politics and corruption as opposed to market need. And then you've got this whole question, about how there is competition. So is competition real in the region, in this sector? And is it good or is it bad? So that's the question. And I'll open it up to anyone. Not everybody has to answer, but anybody has a reaction to that. So why don't we start here?
Yeah, thank you. There is competition, but the competition is good actually. If there is no competition, there is nobody is trying to be better than the others. Let me give you this example. The Jakarta-Bandung high-speed train. At the beginning, there was a tight competition between Japanese and Chinese. At the end, the Chinese won the competition. Now we are discussing about Jakarta-Surabaya. Initially, we were thinking of connecting all the way Jakarta, Bandung, and Surabaya. The Japanese, frankly speaking, doesn't like the idea because they are afraid of being lost for the second time. Because the Chinese will give a lower price, Japanese will compete a better technology, for example. So there is competition, and we enjoy the competition, and we wish the giants, if they are giants, will use this competition fairly for the benefits of Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you. Other reactions? Yes. Renier and then Chifang. Go Renier first, go ahead.
I think when you say competition, you will sort of see from two different things, right? One thing, if you talk about infrastructure competition, I don't believe there's a competition because all the connectivity are actually sort of integrated. I mean, even like Indonesia and Southeast Asia, they do have what they call the master plan of transportation Southeast Asia. But the competition itself is actually on how to attract investment, how to attract the money. And that's why when I actually deliver my sort of remark, where in the past it was focusing on the private or public, now it becomes sort of like two sides of a coin, where it becomes a combined sort of competition, where like, for example, that Pak Ridwan mentioned that the high-speed rail. Suddenly, look, it's a loss not only to the company but to the country as a whole. But in a way, it's actually having this competition is really good because in the construction world, you start to introduce competition in a way to get the most efficient, the most effective, and also the lowest price. And if I take one good example, like in India, when they introduced the high-speed rail in one of the cities, you'll be surprised they have this north-south being built by Japanese, the east-west being built by the Chinese. It's been done intentionally to actually introduce competition to get the most efficient, the most effective, and the cheapest one, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chifang?
Competition is a natural thing, but how to understand the competition. And I think if we understand the competition from the business way, I think it's a good thing. And I think competition is the nature of a business. And just competition between the enterprises, the companies. And but we cannot just understand that this competition from other perspective is not good. Just if we understand a business competition from a political perspective, it's no good for anyone. If I think the competition now, we should confess that the business competition in this area, the infrastructure, it does exist, but it's just a business competition. It's nothing else. So, but maybe some media just would like to add something else on it. That's nothing help to the development of infrastructure in this region. Thank you.
Dr. Chi, you have something on that?
Yeah, so just quickly, in terms of whether the competition is good or bad, looking at real case projects in Australia, it's very common for politics to get in the way of infrastructure development, especially when it's big major projects. For example, everyone's talking about HSR, so I'd just like to take the example of a HSR. But when the politics get in the way of decision making in terms of the detail of the project, for example, I think politics is very important in terms of finding the investors and funding to build HSR itself. But when it comes to where the HSR station should be, how often should the rail be running? Where is it exactly gonna be? Or things like ports. Where should the ports be? Or even highway, it's the same thing. How long should it be? Where should it be? Or even bus stops, where should the bus stop be? Those things should not be decided basis of just political reasons, is my view. And there has been a good example, even from Australia, where because of the change of government, the project changed, and now the benefit is much less. So, it's everywhere. It's not just only to the Indonesian context.
So I know our other panelists might have a response to this, but we have been given the 5-minute sign. I want to get to question and answers. I'm going to ask my easy question now, but I'm going to come back to it towards the end. The easy question is this. I think I probably have more gray hair than the rest of the room combined. So the audience in this conference is very young. So one of the things I'd like you to give is, if you are recommending to this audience in this sector either an issue to study or a career field that they should work on, because these infrastructure issues are not one-year projects. They're 10, 20, 30, 4-year projects. What would you recommend for our young, enthusiastic audience? I'm going to come back to it at the end, right? So short, pithy, and I'm going to ask each of you to say that. But before I do that, that's what we're going to wrap up on. I'm going to take maybe just one or two. We're going to group maybe 2 or 3 questions from the audience, take some answers, and then wrap up because we're out of 5 minutes. Any questions we have from the audience?
Hello. I am a student from Binus University, and I would like to ask, it was mentioned about the future infrastructure for our country and for other countries. Is it considered as green infrastructure, since it is our global conflict is now climate change, and how does the investors and how does the people who make infrastructures and how does the connectiveness is affected by it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really important question. And we're going to turn that to you, but I want to take one more question before we wrap up. Is there any final question? Yes, this gentleman over here.
Okay, my name is Dwiki. I work as a public servant in the Director General of Taxes. And, what I want to ask you is, any opinions about the BRI, which is funding mostly nations with bad financial feasibility? Maybe in the future they won't be able to pay. They won't be able to pay the loans that China has given them to fund the infrastructure. What do you guys think about it? And what BRI is doing is somehow kind of breaking the competition between the regions. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we'll ask the question about climate change to Dr. Jalamaduni. Ridwan, Pak Ridwan. And then we'll go to Kikuchi-san to answer the broader question there, the second one. So, Pak Ridwan, we'll give it to you first.
Very important question on the climate concern. Okay. Yes, we always promote that green infrastructure. One of the 5 principles the government of Indonesia always mention that we want a clean technology, clean infrastructure. For example, port. There's a green port concept has been developed. Energy sector, Indonesian government has committed to develop the 23% of non-fossil based energy. So you are 100% right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll give you an example. Have you ever taken Shinkansen in Japan? Okay, I'm proud of Shinkansen as Japanese, but you may not know that now all the railway companies are private, but there used to be one company called Japan National Railway. It basically went bankrupt. It piled up debt, it was inefficient management, and so on. Then it got privatized. You may not know, Shinkansen now goes to Hokkaido and Kyushu and covers all parts of Japan except Shikoku. But there is only one line that's actually profitable solely on Shinkansen. And that's the line between Tokyo and Osaka. Okay, all the other lines, they actually run deficits. So the private companies need to venture in other businesses to make the whole enterprise profitable. So they go into retails, they go into real estate, they go into urban redevelopment, and so on. So my message is that I'm not saying the National Railway was a complete failure. So as I said in my remarks, there are different stages of development. Public infrastructure requires huge fixed costs. It's just the government is not the best entity to operate and run this business. Okay? So it's quite natural that first the government is heavily involved, but when it comes to operation, I think it's also natural to hand it over to private sectors. The former president of JR Kyushu used to told me that infrastructure are always built by political intentions. It's going to be up to the private sector to make it profitable.
Thank you. All right, we're out of time, but I'm going to go very quickly. We're starting with Tricia. We're going to work our way backwards. If there's just one issue or question that you think this rising generation should focus on, or one area you think has most potential, and we'll just hand it off real quick.
Yeah,
So.
I will just try to reminisce my past. So actually during my, these young people just remind me of mine 10 years ago. And during my time, it was so boring. And guys, you are so lucky. Because during my time, all subject in my class, in my S1, in my bachelor, is all about South China Sea. So, so whenever I attend a course like international communications, it's all about how Chinese diplomacy, Chinese diplomat try to avoid this issue. And whenever I go to the international political economy class, it's more about South China Sea resources issue and so forth. But right now, the things try to get diversified. And thanks to the BRI and also another one, Trump, the rise of the Trump populism, as well as the growing initiative in the regions, and even the ASEAN itself, it tried to enrich our broad knowledge and try to diversify the fields that we are deeply delving into in. So, and another message that I want to deliver here is like, the things that I regret during my S1 is like we are overly focused on the interstate relations, state to state, and we fail to see the micro agencies that reshape this, what happening in international relation. So if you try to devote yourself to learn about China, so please just don't look at Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping, or China as a communist, but try to look more on the other actors in China. Even the Chinese private sector is interesting. It's worth learning because it's ranging from the different sectors, and it's from top 100 companies in the world until the worst one, the 1,000 face of China. Even for Japan, and I hope Japan is not only about the comic, like Japanese culture, J-pop, or just Hello Kitty, Pokemon Go, or something like that. So it's not only soft power, but I hope you also try to learn more about the soft infrastructure that Japan has trained for Indonesian. Yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. We're actually just almost out of time, so I'm going to ask the rest of the panel, just short and pithy. What is the issue or the area they ought to focus on? Rainier, we'll start with you.
I think I don't have specific issue, but what I can say to the younger guys, just focus what you do, but thinking outside the box. Because if I just refer to my experience, I'm going to say to every of you, become an engineer, because I'm an engineer by background. But reality-wise, over the past 18 years, I work in engineering, I would jump into management, I did a lot of financing, I did a lot of business model, I did a lot of stuff. And it managed me to working about 12 countries in 3 different continents.
Fantastic. Think outside the box. Very good. Tomo.
Okay, I think to make the century an Asian century, I like your optimism and confidence. But I think we need more people who think about public goods, not just within each country, but in this region. So I'd like to encourage you to think about Asia.
Thanks. Sai.
When I was doing my PhD, I was offered a job straight away. Why? Because I did cost-benefit analysis. It falls under transport economics. If you want to find a job, learn how to do cost-benefit analysis. And if you need a teacher, let me know. I can teach you how.
Qifang?
Okay. So I think just several words. First is common goods, and the second is that good for all, and then is that transparency, and then is that business is the business. Okay.
Thank you.
Make friends with as many friends as possible. You have that opportunity. Don't fight with any Chinese because he or she is Chinese, with any Japanese because just be good to your friends. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our panel today.